Hi, everybody. Today's May 1st, May Day, and I'm happy to have Charles Love on with me. He is the host of the eponymous Charles Love Show, um, and I became familiar with his work recently regarding some events in Newton, Massachusetts. We'll get to those, but Charles, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're writing, what your show is about.
Well, you mentioned the show. Well, actually, the show is on hiatus, and I do a podcast called "Cut the Bull" with Wilford Riley and Shamika Michelle. That's what I'm currently doing. It's a weekly podcast where we talk about topical issues. I primarily focus on culture rather than the politics and the partisanship that most people talk about, and kind of just calling people out on their BS, right? Cut the bull, talking about both how some are just mendacious, right? You literally don't believe what you're saying. You're lying about that, and that's a problem. But that's probably not the most prevalent issue we have. We have some true believers, and to them you have to take a different approach. And my point is that you give them their argument. And if you think that racism, policing, immigration, whatever the problem is what you're talking about really a solution? Are you wasting your time, spinning your wheels, or are you making the problem worse? And in a lot of cases, that's what they're doing. What they're saying they're trying to fix is one thing, but what they're actually doing is harming the very thing they talk about. So I call that out as often as I can as well.
It's been a strange ride we've had. I think Barack Obama was going to be the solution to all our problems. I think he even announced that he was. He said, "We are the solution," if I recall. A lot of these, problems seem currently to center around race, whatever the concept of race is. And has this race situation gotten better since we elected our first, say, black president, but although half white, half black president, or whatever?
And was he even black? Depending on what he said, that would dictate whether he was black. Sometimes he was, and sometimes he wasn't. No, but. So I would say that no, things have not gotten better. But, the last couple of years, we know why. But if you go beyond that, you bring up Obama, you're talking about in those years, at that point, have things gotten better since then? I would say they've gotten worse since then. But the but is because, like Thomas Sowell will say when he asks those questions, one of his key questions is compared to what? And I think the problem is that too many people, not everyone, but too many people were under the expectation or trying and moving toward, which we hear a lot from the left, eliminating racism, right? So if that is the goal, we have not achieved it. But I would argue that it's a silly goal, trying to correct human nature, right? Trying to fix everything. You're never going to fix everything. And one thing I say often to my friends, and I don't say in interviews that often because it doesn't come up. I'm open about anything, just doesn't come up, is that I think the problem we have with race up until the last 18 months, because then things got crazy then. But before that, the problem we had with race is that we had reached pretty much the peak of the elimination, the equality, and the equal treatment that we were going to get. We were never going to get 100%. And somewhere, probably before Obama, somewhere in the late 90s, early 2000s, I would say, we pretty much hit the peak. That was the best we could get. And we just needed to live our lives and moved on. And some genius got the idea that we could make it perfect. And we kept tinkering with it. And we seem to be making it worse. The more we move the things, we make it worse. I mean, the laws were put into place after the Civil Rights Movement. But anybody who's honest would say that there was still some time things needed to be worked out. The culture needed to change. The belief systems of some people still needed to be adjusted, didn't meet up with the laws. That's all true. But then 15 years after that, we had pretty much flushed all that out. Now we're at the point where everything was pretty equal, but the gap is still there. So the country's not, the laws are gone. The country is probably no longer majority racist at this point, right? Not even close at this point. Yet the gap is still there. So the next 15, 20 years we spent closing that gap. Once we hit around 2000, that was about as good as it was going to get. If you wanted it better, you had to do that yourself. You had to improve your household, your family, your neighbors and friends, your community, and go out. The government wasn't going to fix anything else. They had fixed all that they could fix. The culture had changed. There was more interracial marriages, all this kind of stuff. TV had changed. You could make fun of each other and it was fine. It was just where it needed to be. And we broke all that down. And I would say that here's a good example. If you think back to when you were, where you were at that time, or if we could take a teenager from someone who was 17 in, 1998 and warp them into times now, they would be absolutely shocked at the things that you can't say, can't do, and can't watch. And that's a mere 20 years ago. So that's the telltale signs that, you had white guys and black guys who would just rib each other and make fun. And today they would get canceled. They would be like, what? That's just the way we talk. What's wrong with you? This TV shows. Everybody who's older, like you and like me, would talk about, well, in the 70s, they had shows like this. We don't have to go back to the 70s. You couldn't do Friends today. You couldn't do The Office today. You couldn't do Seinfeld today. Right? You couldn't do any of those shows today. You can't play the same music today. Right? So I think it's because we tried to fix what we couldn't fix. And that's the problem with where race is now. So to answer your question again, is it better than where it was then? It's like, depends on how you look at it, right? If the goal was to make it perfect, you never made it. It was the wrong goal to have, but no, we did not achieve that. But I think things were about as good as they could be, and then we broke them again.
Yeah. So I like your overview. It resonates with me. What was the tipping point? What's the breaking point? And maybe can you parse the difference between equity and equality, which I think that kind of word switch, a couple letters, AL maybe, equity, equality, it seems to have been the genesis or the pathway of this switch.
Well, there's two things I'll say about that, two different answers. I'll do this first piece second, where you said, kind of where it came from. But before I get to that, we talk about the equity and equality. I'll have to go grab it later so you can see it. My second book, because it was kind of prophetic. I saw this coming and I spoke about it. I think I wrote that book in 16 or 17. But I didn't see them calling it equity. The name of the book is We Want Equality, How the Fight for Equality Gave Way to Preference, right? And so the whole point is I saw this shift of, like I said, I thought it was as close as it could be. And now we were moving in the wrong direction. I saw people go from, remember during the civil rights movement, the sandwich board that says, I am a man, right? Which implied I'm the same as you, treat me the same, to explicitly saying, treat me differently, right? So saying, if you're Black, you should do this. White people need to do this, that kind of thing. I saw that coming. So while I didn't say equity, I did say that was a problem, the equity versus equality. What people used to say is, I want to be treated the same. I want to be able to, if I have the same abilities, be afforded the same opportunities. It doesn't, because a lot of times you hear people say the problem with equity is this equity of outcome instead of equity of opportunity, which is almost right. But equity of opportunity isn't really fair, right? Because how do you give everybody the same opportunity? Do I have the opportunity to try out and play in the NBA, right? Everybody's not going to try out because everybody's not good enough, right? What about, you want more women in STEM? Maybe, but what if she decides not to major in it, right? So you're never going to even have because everybody's not going to take advantage of every opportunity, right? We're going to self-select. So really the problem became a problem of equity versus equality when people started saying that there are gaps and we need to close these gaps no matter what. If the gaps are caused by racism, they need to be closed. I'm with them on that. But if the gaps are because if you don't have as many, well, there's a lot of cities with large number of minority police officers, but if you happen to have a city and there's very few Black police officers, but it's because Blacks in that city have a negative view about police and they don't want to apply for that job. You can't then say the very fact that there's a gap. You can't take the Ibram Kendi school of racism and say anywhere there's a gap, the only plausible reason must be racism. And that's what equity is doing beyond just having the same outcome. Even if you're saying I want equity, and I don't really think that everyone should have the same outcome, you still think that the system needs to be adjusted so every effort can be made to have more fill in the blank, more Black doctors. Well, if you're not giving them the same, if you're dumbing down the curriculum to get more Blacks in, and you're limiting, advanced math, like I mentioned earlier in the piece about, well, it's not equity. So there's not enough Blacks applying for the advanced math. So instead of getting younger Blacks interested in math and tutoring them so they're better, just scrap the whole plan.
Right.
That's their idea of equity, is what I called in that book negative equality. So it's negative equality, because if you say everyone having equality is a good thing, I could come behind and say, well, if I take some opportunities from other people and bring them down to the same level, we still have equality, right? I don't have to bring them up to have equality. I can just bring other people down. So equity, as used by people today, is, even distribution. We need more people in this. I'm sorry, what?
I think you're making an excellent point. From a investor's standpoint, they say, "Oh, what's your equity in that company when you've invested? If you own stock, do you have an equity share of that company, which means ownership?" And
Right.
so equity is, I'm not sure obviously it sounds like equality, but I think you're making an interesting point that it has to do essentially with the post facto ownership rather than the opportunity to get it.
Yeah.
And so, I think your point about the NBA is very reasonable. I find that, I'm a white Jewish male. I'm in my 60s right now. I find very few of us playing for the NBA. There aren't enough American white people. There are no. I'm not sure if there are any Jewish guys in the NBA, and certainly is nobody over 60. Sure, certainly we should make it reflect the fan base, which might very well skew in my direction. So, should the Celtics or the Knicks, have one or two guys like me on the team? I mean, that would be lovely for me, but certainly it would hold the team back, and then it would have to be a whole kind of distribution aspect. I think the NBA and the NFL are genuine meritocracies, and they skew Black. And I don't think anybody really complains about that, because most fans, I think the racial aspect is completely, no pun intended, bleached out of the sports world. I see kids with Mahomes jerseys and Jalen Hurts and whatever. People don't really think about this kind of like property aspect where, oh, this is reserved for this, and we can't be the fan of it. People don't even realize whether Patrick Mahomes is white or Black, and I think frankly he's both, and so too are many. I think race is just kind of one of these distinctions that will fall by the wayside over time unless we keep parsing it and giving out spoils based on it, in which case it takes kind of
it incentivizes people.
Exactly. So I apologize for the interruption.
No, that's good. But one other thing about the sport thing that's important, and you almost went there, is that everybody uses that example to say, well, what should we have more whites here in this sport, more Blacks in that sport? But beyond that, you mentioned the thing about sports being the true meritocracy. Regardless of people, the most right wing, whatever you want to call them, you want to label them, the most liberal, person, whatever the case may be, if they're sports fan, and I write about this in the book, and I say, they're in the stands and they're, super pro-Black, BLM, fist in the air, and they have a Black quarterback and he's lousy, right? They're the first person they say, bench him, right? No one cares about equity at that point. They would scream, he's a bum and he needs to go, trade him. And they would not hesitate to do it, right? That white racist would be the first one, excited because his team just got Mahomes as the quarterback, right? So they want the best player to play. That's the only place they want the best person to play, no matter who they are. And they want the bad people gone regardless of the race. Everywhere else, we're supposed to accommodate. We're supposed to make sure we have the united colors of Benetton. We need to have women and Asians and LGBT and Black, doctors and astronauts.
No, exactly right.
It makes no sense.
There's two points. This one little letter I read before the internet. I didn't clip it out. I don't know how to find it again, but it was a letter in the Boston Globe probably about 35 years ago, and a guy was writing in. He says, "I'm Black," or whatever the expression was, African American, whatever they were using at the time, and he said, "You know what I really like? I really like getting yelled at when I'm driving." And he says, I know when I say it doesn't make any sense, but this is the deal. I'm driving along, I cut somebody off by mistake, or I'm not paying attention, and somebody honks at me. And invariably, when they pull up, they see I'm black, and they're like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," because they don't want to appear as if they were race, based or whatever, as if they're
Right.
angry at a black guy. And he says, "But I was driving poorly, and I appreciate being honked at because, I don't want to kill anybody, and I want to be corrective, and I should get my behavior better." So I don't think they had texting back then, but whatever he's doing, and
Hmm.
so forth. Says, but it's the only honest time. The only time I get honest feedback is when I'm in the car because people don't. Anyway, the similarity there is with helmets on the sports field. You make a play and people don't really see you. They're watching your motion, and they have to react with your actual physicality and not your kind of ethos, your presence, or these other secondary factors. And people, if Tom Brady is still a good player, they want Tom Brady, and if Patrick Mahomes is a better player, they want him. and
Yep.
and it doesn't come down to shades or whatever. People really want that end result. And it's whereas I just had Heather McDonald on my show last
Hmm.
week, and her book is When Race Trumps Merit. And this
Right.
is kind of like it's almost like you're moving the keystone out of the bridge. Everything's there for a little bit, but then it starts to tumble down when you just want some kind of proportional aspect in all your professions based on these kind of secondary attributes, and you can parse it however you want. In this case, we're talking about race, but it can be other things. It can be sexual preference and all this other stuff. And they never talk about political preference, where we need 50% of conservatives at the New York Times, or
Right.
whatever the New York City happens to be. Maybe it's only 10% in New York City, but we never think about that. We never think about other fields we're not interested in, like plumbers.
Right.
We need more women, doing sewage work. I mean, it just
Right.
never kind of comes up that way. Um, so I'm interested in your second book as well, and a lot of your recent articles, and how you've seen the scene and where are things headed. And the real inherent question is, are these motivations and activities emanating from the Black community? Are they benefiting the Black community? And who's saying it, and who's doing it, and who's benefiting?
Oh, it's definitely not coming from them. Some of them agree with it, some of them don't, but it's not coming from them, right? It's coming just like everything else, right? It's coming from academia. It's coming from people who can profit from doing it, things of that nature. Is it helping? In most cases, no. And sometimes, unfortunately, the intent isn't even to help. But even where it is, I mean, think of the stories that we've heard in the last 2 or 3 years. SATs are bad because half of the people who say it's bad are the racists who say blacks can't test. So all of them, they're just bad at testing. But the others say, well, no, I'm not saying they're bad at testing. The issue is, to do well on it, most people need help, right? They do the test prep and that kind of thing. And affluent whites have the money to get test prep, and blacks don't. So we should just no longer use the SAT for admittance. Or another option would be to get test prep for black kids. They never offer that,
Right.
right? You talk about what was the San Diego Unified Schools about 2.5 years ago, who had a problem with their grading system because they counted everything, like whether they turned in homework, whether they turned it in on time, not just whether it was right, tardiness, truancy, and things of that nature. So they just changed the grading system instead of improving the behavior. Clearly, blacks and Hispanics can't be on time and can't turn in homework.
I
So
know.
let's just not grade it. So the problem is, but then on the other end, as we mentioned earlier, they want more black doctors, more black people who have careers in STEM and things of that nature. How are you going to get that when it takes a certain amount of work ethic, um, an ability to do math and science at a certain level, but you just dumb down the requirements, so no one's trying to. You didn't try to raise them up to the level. You lowered the level, so then they're not going to be as successful. Not because they're black, not because they can't do it, because you didn't prepare them for it.
Right. Yeah. Now, I also think it's a strange message. I think the late Michael Gerson wrote The Soft Bigotry of Low Expectations. I think he wrote that for George Bush the first.
I
Um,
thought it was.
well, fair enough.
Mhm.
At any rate,
But W quoted it. That's why most people know
right.
it.
But I think he wrote it earlier. But
Right.
be that as it may, I just can't imagine being told, you can't do this because this, I don't know, melanin content or whatever you want to call it. Race is really kind of a, it's a concept in a sense, and things are different divides in different times and different places in different ways. I grew up in the Bronx in the 1960s, and my neighborhood, we had Italians, we had Armenian kids, we had Irish, and there were neighborhoods, and Jewish kids would get beaten up in the Irish neighborhood, whatever. I don't know. Nobody said, "Oh, hey, you're all white." Like, you're all the same. This is not, there are going to be divisions wherever you are, and
Right.
and whatever basis they happen to be on. In Germany, there are Turkish kids against German kids, and I'm sure the Syrians, whatever, people divide up however they are, and there are going to be divisions. This is a tiny anecdote, but Derek White joined the Celtics last year, and I'm a fan, and I like him, and I think he's great. And Jason Tatum kind of photobombed his first interview, and he comes in and like messes his hair and hugs him, and it's like, so somebody says, Jason, why are you so excited about Derek White? He says, and he said, he's light skinned like me. And so, and the Celtics, I haven't really counted, but I think mostly black players. And but there has to be something in his mind where he sees this division. So
Right.
even if you had an entirely black team, I mean, there's different gradations, and people are always going to be subdividing one way or another. And I don't think Malcolm Brogdon, has I think a professor for a father and a lawyer for a mother, I don't think he's the same as some. I can't think of it, the right player in this case, but somebody who I think they're class distinctions.
Mm-hmm.
There's always going to be that. Um,
Yeah.
it's just a funny thing. I'm Jewish, and people, oh, you're Jewish, but in my parents and my grandparents' generation, they're all different gradations. Oh, he's from a shtetl, he's from a little town. Oh, they are, my parents thought they had a mixed marriage because my father's father was a carpenter. He's a manual laborer, and my mother's family were all educated. She went to art school and all that kind of stuff. They had money. They're well. So her parents looked down on my father's
Mm-hmm.
side, but it all mushes out. It all comes down to what you want and what you work at and what you achieve. And life is a very brief thing, and to be saddled kind of with this kind of like, weird historical burden, is not necessarily levitating if people are going to give you things without having to work for them. I think the essence is work, and there's no reason, and again, I apologize for monopolizing, but when you see sports, there's no reason that somebody, who has work ethic can't succeed at anything. And I think a
Right.
lot of the players really exemplify this.
Yeah, I agree.
Anyway, so let's let me try to give you a question. Um,
I
so
was.
what's going on with crime? Is there a differential? I have one of my fans on LinkedIn actually, who insists there's really no differential between the crime rate amongst black youth and elsewhere, and the arrest rate has merely to do with racism, police tactics, and so forth. They're looking at certain neighborhoods. They're predacious, predatory, whatever the word is, mendacious and um, and how does this kind of factor into kind of the reaction at the Memphis shootings?
I lost part of that. I know. I heard you talk about somebody on LinkedIn and said there's no difference, and then
Well,
and then
yeah,
he kind of
is
broke
there
up.
a difference? Is there a crime difference, or propensity to crime amongst, say, quote unquote, inner city youth, oftentimes black? Is it a class distinction? Is there a difference in crime rate, or are police more active and alert, and working on the basis of color?
That is the great debate, I guess. Right? It's because if you want to be honest about it, it's so complicated because many things can be true at the same time. Right? So crime can be very localized, and it could be different types of, like the types of crimes that are prevalent in one city can be different than the other city. I'll give you an example, not counting this crime. I was looking at homelessness stats the other day, and they were telling me you got the big cities, and they put up the top 10 cities with the most homeless people. Right? Now, homelessness is a problem in America everywhere. Right? More in big cities than small cities, but It's not going to shock you when you look at the numbers that, if you live in Chicago, you live in these other DC, you see the camps at Union Station, you're like, man, it's really bad in DC. It's really bad in Chicago. But when they broke down the top 2 cities with the most homeless people, New York, and that's only because it's so much bigger than the other cities, was the only city that wasn't on the West Coast because it's warm.
Exactly.
Right? So
Right.
you get New York, which was second. Then it's like San Francisco, LA, San Diego. Right, right. So what happens is there are some general issues that are general problem because of the culture, as I talk about, that are just cultural issues. There are subsets to those cultures that skew more white and skew more black, and that's true, and that's where people can dance in that lane and play with the race. But in either case, it doesn't mean whites. So the problem with playing with race is that you have to use it where, when it gives you information that's useful. But when you use it as a battering ram on the left or the political right, it becomes a problem because what they tend not to do in either case is extrapolate those numbers to whiteness, right? So they'll say in inner city areas where the black crime is higher, they'll say blacks are disproportionately doing X, Y, Z. Factually accurate, right? But they'll never, but then they'll say blacks are 13% of the population, and then they go on. But no one will ever say, yes, the majority of the crimes in Appalachia are white. Rural whites commit a disproportionate amount of crime. But they will never say, and therefore whites are X. They will never take that information and tie it to whites. So because the percentage is, you can't, now some will say it's because the percentages are so low. But then they're surprised when I tell them, I like to ask people, I say, so what percentage of blacks, just within blacks, you're only talking about the 40 million blacks in the country, what percentage of them commit violent crime? To a person, everyone guesses too high. At least the more educated people, the more nuanced people will guess somewhere between 5 and 10%. Most people say somewhere between 15 and 25%.
Oh, right. I would never.
It's less than 3.
Right.
Right. So that means not even amongst these dangerous blacks, 97% of them are not committing crime. Even with 20% poverty, so you can't even tie it to income levels in poverty. But that discredits both the left's argument, crime is because of poverty, and the right's argument of, well, the 13% of the population, they commit 50% of the murders. So the numbers tell the truth, but it depends on how you cherry pick them. So that's why the question is complicated. So there is a problem, some people call it a pathology, within certain groups of black people. That's true. But it's not the majority of them. And it seems to be in certain areas with it's almost like it has a cocktail, right? If you have the right components, then you get a higher propensity of these things, right? See, whether it be high teenage pregnancy, drugs, poverty included, but all these other factors, not alone, right? How they police. And then the police, obviously, it becomes a vicious cycle. So the police are tasked to do a job across the whole city. But as the commanders are sending people out, you're going where you're getting most of the calls. So if most of the calls is coming from where most of the crime is, and most of the crimes are in communities where the majority of people live there are black, I don't call them black communities, they're just communities where the majority of people live there are black, then you're going to send the police there. And therefore, most of the interactions are going to be there, right? And that's just a matter of simple numbers. It's not racism. No one's going there saying, we're these white racist cops and we want to go attack black people, right? And to that argument, that's what people are saying. Well, why do we have so many black people being shot by the police? Well, we don't really, right? Because if you want to look at the numbers as a whole, take all of them and be honest, a lot of the stuff that the left and right are true, but when you layer on all the other layers, you end up saying some really shocking things. You know one shocking thing? I've only had one other person say this, but it's true. You know one shocking thing you'll say? The left commonly says that the mass incarceration, right? And they say we over police, and they compare us to all these other countries. You know what I say? I think we under police. And the evidence shows it. So New Yorkers, give them credit. They do better probably because next to Paris, I think they have more cameras than anywhere else in the world. But in Chicago, when I moved to New York from Chicago, and you know what Chicago's closure rate for the police was on murders? What percentage of murder cases they closed? Well,
Well,
since I brought it up, it's
yeah,
low.
because you're asking, it's going to be a low number. I hate to say it, but 10%.
Yeah, that's 20. So wait, let's hear this out. Let's just use some logic. Take race and everything off the table. We over police in America, yet 80% of the shooters in Chicago are not in jail.
Right.
So, and then the next argument is, well, we arrest too many people who are nonviolent. I don't want nonviolent criminals in jail unless they keep doing it over and over again. But the problem is, how do you define nonviolence? Because in New York, where I live, my wonderful DA, Alvin Bragg, said if a man pulls a gun on you and forcibly robs you, but he doesn't shoot you, that's not violent. I disagree.
I disagree also.
So the left likes to say people in jail for low-level drug charges. Not true. Most of the people in federal prisons are there for drugs, but it's a federal charge. So feds don't lock you up for a joint.
No.
These are people moving weight across state lines, right?
Absolutely.
But the other fact, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but the other fact is that even though more than 50% of the people in federal prison are there for drugs, federal prison is only like somewhere between 10 and 12% of the people in jail. So all the other people are there for murder and domestic violence and rape and stabbing people and all this other stuff. So you can say that we over police if you compare, depending on how you look at the numbers. You compare it to the percentage per 100,000 people that are arrested in America compared to other countries, over police. But I say if rapists and murderers are getting off scot-free, we're not locking enough people up.
Right.
So that's the problem. So no one's going after blacks. If I happen to be in a city where most of the crime are committed by blacks, the people I arrest are going to be black. Then we have this culture where it creates this vicious cycle where the elites who don't live that way, your Charles Blows and your Michael Eric Dysons, teachers at Georgetown and all, is telling everybody that the police are out to get you and it's bad. So I believe them. So now I got a chip on my shoulder. Then when I get pulled over, I'm all lippy, right?
Right.
So then we get back, forgetting that the police should have control. I'm not condoning the police. They say, well, the police are trained this, that, and the other. They're also humans. So yes, so they snap at 50 cops and 45 of them blow it off and the other 5 shoot you in the face. Should they be fired? Yes. Should they go to jail? Yes. But you're still shot. And you're shot because you didn't react the way you should act in that stop. So everybody had a part to play in that, but it's not systemic. It's not intentional, right? It's not racist. There's no prevalent racism of cops shooting black people. It's not true.
I agree with you there. There's getting back to Heather McDonald. She has a book on this. I can't remember the name, but we can find it maybe. But there's
the war on cops.
Yes, the war on cops. Exactly. Thank you. There's also a Chris Rock short, probably from 2005 or so.
Oh yeah, you're gonna say it? Say it.
Yeah. Do you know this one? 2000. So. I think it's about 18 years ago. It's like how not to get beaten up by the cops, and so it's basically simple lessons. And it was timely then. It's timely now, and it's like basically what you say is like don't don't get out, don't be violent, try to be polite, try to get pulled over. Humans are humans and we react. Dogs are dogs, frankly, and if I see a dog on the street, I don't really know what's going on, I'm not going to go attack him. I might get attacked. I think this is the law of the forest, the law of the jungle, the law of the streets, the law of human nature is that you try to be civil and then things will work out better.
Yep.
If you smile at people and so forth. But if you look at the actual videos of police shootings, they have restraint a lot of times. People, it's not just on TV, it's in real life that people want to, if they're criminal, they want to get away. And sometimes they want to shoot the policeman to do that. And there are a lot of, reverse shootings. The police shootings you don't hear about are people shot as police. And so it's a dangerous job. Anyway, so is there a question here? Yeah. I'd like to maybe segue a little bit to some of your other cultural aspects. I came across your work recently again, and I'd seen a lot of your articles earlier, but I made full circle because you commented on my lovely leafy suburb. We actually call it the Garden City.
Tony suburb.
Yes, exactly. It's a pleasant place.
Right.
And Newton, Massachusetts was in the news for sponsoring within the high school, and I assume paying the participant for drag queen story hour for the high school. And my understanding is they didn't let the parents know directly. You wrote about this topic. What are your thoughts on it? What was the angle that you wrote?
Well, what I was writing about was more along the line of when people push back against like that. There's this playbook afoot that's working so well. That's why they keep using it, and no one is calling it out specifically. They talk about because it gets mixed in with the DEI and race and what's being taught. But I'm not even trying to argue whether, well, the drag queen is different, but whether these little moves that they're doing to try to improve racism and all these other things are good or not. I have my opinions, but that's not the point. The point is you can't take a parent who sees something in the curriculum they don't like. And so they said, excuse me, Madam Principal, excuse me, Mr. School Board Member, can I ask a question about that? And bam, now you're a right-wing MAGA Trump supporter, right? In Newton, I mean, what did Trump get? 4% of the vote there or something? It had to be really low. So unless every parent who voted for Trump is the person putting this together, it's highly unlikely. But that's what they do. They malign them and they call them out. And so that was my problem. It's like, some of these people might have some good points. They might be wrong on most of the things, but they might have a good point. And they have children in the school. They have a right to speak. The fact that we are shouting people down and having pseudo witch trials, right? That's what they're doing, right? Racist, right? Don't listen to that person. It's silly, it's childish, it's unproductive, and it needs to be called out. So my angle was to say, I don't know what these people might have wanted, but you should hear them out. You shouldn't just say, well, this is because it was like a call to arms before the hearing. They learned about it. They sent out an email saying, there's this hearing about these people want to do this committee. They're all right-wing crazy people, and we must come and stop them. So, of course, person after person, I cried when I saw that she wanted to end this program. We didn't talk about ending the program. They just, it was gaslighting. So that was my angle. But as far as the drag queen thing, I'm really basic. I'm so logical. I'm so locked in logic that I don't get into the political angles of it and all this other. Do whatever you want to do. I don't want anything banned. I just have very simple questions. Why? What is the benefit? What is the benefit? And you said it was high school, right? I'm used to seeing this as like late elementary school, 5th, 6th, 7th grade. So shouldn't these high school kids already know how to read? Why do they need a drag queen to come and read to them? I mean, in high school, you should be writing papers on Shakespeare, if they still allow that in your Tony suburb. But you should not. You don't need anybody to read. But so let's think about the ones we saw, the high profile ones. Reading to 5th graders. Let's say. What is the point? If the kids are reading at grade level, they don't need it. If they're reading below grade level, they need more help than just some random person to come in. And is there some scientific study that's been done that proves that men who dress as women on the weekends and sing Liza Minnelli songs, I know those are the traditional drag queens, not the weird ones we're seeing now, are better readers and therefore should be the people reading? Because that's the thing about it, though. Think about it, no one's asking that question. They're saying, which is, I get it, right? Because you see it and you have a visceral reaction. So we spend so much time, somewhat rightly, but we spend so much time saying, is it right to have kids seeing this man in a dress? Or, hey, that's him living his truth and you're suppressing his life and he should be able to live this way and I stand behind him. No one, but I'm just the one person standing on the sideline saying, can somebody ask if it helps them read? Can somebody explain to me why it's necessary to have a man dressed as a woman read rather than, I don't know, a guy with elbow patches and a pipe looking professorial like a college professor reading? What is better about the reading that's coming from the drag queen? No one's answered that question for me.
Right. I think you make great points. I think they're really pithy and right on. But the other thing is, obviously it's not about reading, and it's obviously the kids don't need to be
what it is.
Yeah, it's not about that. It's about presenting this alternative lifestyle. But the secondary question would be: is it productive? Is it what they should be doing? Should they be spending their time doing STEM or whatever, getting ahead in the world? And if it's about sexual mores and changing those, is it disrespectful to say the Muslim students or the Jewish students or the Christian students, anybody who's a believer? Right. A and B, if it's a matter of showing sexual aspects and so forth should it be part of sex education, and will they have to honor the sexual students and heterosexual life, of which frankly everybody at the school originated in one form or another through heterosexual relations? Should they have a pole dancer come in and do a strip tease or something like that to show people
Chardonnay,
what that's
let's
like?
Chardonnay, because she's gonna have like a car or wine name. Let's Chardonnay or Porsche come in there and take it to the pole. Yeah, with that. Or the inverse would be if it's you're right. Obviously, I'm making fun because the same thing is if it's not about reading, as you wisely put it, why just read? Why not drag queen shop? Why not drag queen basketball practice? Why just reading? It seems because it seems like
and
it's not about reading, but it seems
how many drag queens are on the Knicks right now? I
4.
Hopefully we
Well,
don't.
Miami had Dwayne. Oh no, Russell Westbrook was carrying. I don't know, but look.
Yeah.
But the thing about that is, if it's not about reading, maybe they chose reading because it's the thing that skewed younger, because they were trying to do younger kids. Because like they wouldn't do drag queen shop because that would be exclusively high school. But the other thing is, if it's, I don't want to give them ideas. I mean, people watching the show, I hope they don't watch it and like, oh, we should do that. But why not just do it if it's for inclusiveness and you just want to make them feel whatever? I don't know why it's about the adults feeling anyway, but why not do it after school? Right. Why does it have to be during school hours? Why are you taking kids out of class so they can come and do the same? They're not learning anything, so what's the point? The school hours should be for learning.
Right. Well, I think when Oscar Wilde, was somewhat closeted as a writer and homosexual, they called it the love that dare not speak its name. And apparently now it doesn't keep, now that it's learned how to speak its name, it doesn't ever shut up.
Want to stop.
Yeah. So it's not and then used to be don't ask, don't tell, which is almost the same kind of thing. But now it's more than that. It's not like, leave us in peace. We just want the same things. We want you to not just obey it. We want you to
celebrate it, to revel in it.
Yes. Not only and change your perception, of what reality is. So you're obligated now to call whoever that is, if that person feels like he's a man or woman, whatever, you're obligated to call that person that, despite your own perceptions or reality. So just on a kind of a race cultural basis, to put it, say, in perspective, if is somebody allowed to, do, say, minstrel blackface and present, instead of a drag queen story hour, could there be a drag black story hour, or or a drag white, where
if they identify as black, of course, because you are who you identify as.
Right. And could you have a drag teen hour where some 50-year-old guy comes in and identifies as a teenager and starts going to high school instead? I mean, what yes. I had this discussion with a relative recently, and I was joking. I said, if I do this, sex change thing, I'm actually going to do my age also, because I don't want to be, a 60-year-old woman. I want to be like a 19-year-old woman. It's like, well, you can't change your age, she said to me. It's like,
so you missed the other part.
Yeah, right. It's just, it's what's mutable and what's immutable. Anyway, I want to touch on an interesting article you were talking about, white wokeness. Can we? Do you remember that article? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, City Journal. Yes. I was fed up with the reaction to, during COVID, to George Floyd's killing. Right. Didn't condone it. Didn't say the officer did a wonderful job. Didn't say George Floyd deserved to die. Just didn't think he should have been lionized, for one. But that wasn't even the problem. I can ignore that. It was the perception of blacks. You mentioned earlier, we were talking about that, and we were talking about policing and those kind of things. But if you go back to that time and listen to what people were saying in the media, celebrities, and I think I wrote about some of the examples. It was a bunch of white liberal. It was a bunch of stereotypical Newton residents droning on about what blacks need. And I showed this stuff to my black friends. Most of them liberals thought it was bat crap crazy. It's like, do you know a black person? I mean, I don't know if you do, you can think about it, but I'm talking to all my black friends. Do you know one, a single? Can you think of one black person you know in your whole lifetime? who hates being black and wish they could change and be white? Because I don't know what. But reading what they said, I'm reconsidering now. Because the way they described black life, it was sad. It was defeatist. Blacks were uneducated. Blacks were all in the criminal justice system, and they were all poor. They were dumb, poor criminals, all of them, the whole lot of them. But they were doing it, spinning in a positive sense. I call it like the modern day John Calhoun. Remember John Calhoun, if you all forgot?
Yes.
He was pro-slavery, right? But he took a different angle. A lot of people are like, we need them to help. We need this. He was like, it's benevolent. Slavery is actually a good thing because the black is not smart enough to survive on his own. But for us, he drowned, right? And this was the new version of that. We had these celebrities. They did a black and white, very sad. I apologize. I recognize. I forgot the word term they used. But they were basically Julianne Moore. Blacks are being murdered in the streets. And then someone else would go on and say, blacks are all caught up in the criminal justice. All of them? Really? Because I don't know one that is. So all of them, right? And so that's what made me so upset because, and I did a lot of media because of it. And the point I kept making is, like I said, about what percentage of violent criminals, 2.3. What percentage of college graduates? They're always, most people are shocked when I tell them that over 50% of Americans don't have a college degree. So most white people don't have a college degree. Right. So is there a gap? Yeah, but it's like 48% for whites and like 39% for blacks. People don't have college degrees. So what? But they were shocked that blacks were so high and shocked that whites were that low because they think white is like 75% and black is like 3%. Right. Same thing with criminal justice system. And poverty, 20% poverty rate, higher than whites. Right. Whites was, I don't know, 10%. But when I asked people, they thought it was 50, whatever percent. And the reason I make that point so clear is because if you think racism is a problem, I think it exists, but I don't think it's a problem. But how big a problem you think it is will dictate how you try to fix it. So if you think all blacks are poor, being accosted every day with microaggressions, are uneducated, can't get a job, then of course your response is going to be blow the whole thing up. Because you can't fix those kind of numbers. If all the blacks are being attacked by whites and all of them are poor and all, you can't fix it. So I wrote that article to say this white wokeness, which I don't use that term that often, but I used it because people were using that time. This white wokeness is going to kill us. It's like Jason Riley's book, Please Just Stop Helping Us, right? Right? It's like, oh my God, you're helping us into oblivion. Just stop. So I mean, but at that point, he wrote this book before that. So at that point, it was at a whole different level. It was, we got to do this for the blacks. It was like, I'm doing, like, I asked my friends, one other thing I asked my friends, and you've been in Newton, Tony Newton, you probably see it. I asked my black friends, it's a little more now because of George Floyd, but go back. Remember, BLM started 15, 16, something like that. So this is 2019, 2020. How many of you have a BLM sign or a hate has no home sign? Show of hands. No hands in the air. How many of you have a friend or family member with a BLM sign or a hate has no home sign? No hands. Why are they only in white homes and predominantly in the suburbs?
I think in the cities, people put them up on their storefronts so they wouldn't get rocks.
Right.
They were a protectant. They were kind of the reverse Kristallnacht.
Right.
But I have we see it a fair amount here.
Never seen one in any of my communities growing up where I was, when I was in Gary, Indiana, when I was in Chicago. Never saw one, ever. Mm-hmm.
So
it's a white thing.
Yeah,
black
absolutely.
BLM sign in a window.
So you mentioned Thomas Sowell earlier, and one of the first books I read of his was I think it was called White Liberals, Black Rednecks, White Liberals. Yeah. And I want to maybe fold that into the Great Society. And you mentioned Jason Riley, stop helping us. Leave us alone, stop helping us.
Right.
So I think these three things relate together. The theme of the Thomas Sowell book was that whites, out of guilt, are glorifying the worst aspects of black culture. And just like you're saying, blacks are not that. They are not all, hip hop, pants around their thighs, do-rag, gangster.
And one quick thing, I don't want to throw you off, but we skew younger too. So as you look at blacks who are older, all those numbers change again.
Absolutely. Now that's another Thomas Sowell point. He points out that, as far as income inequality, that it's not a fixed thing. It changes with, age, and people don't stay, flipping hamburgers at McDonald's the rest of their lives.
Right.
Um, and then kind of to tie into the Great Society, which was the thing that was supposed to help. Did I don't know if you have a perspective on that, and if you want to, maybe tie these themes together as they're being tied together in my mind. Maybe I'm crazy, but did the Great Society make a great society? How great was Black society in the 50s that it needed the Great Society to come along? And did the Great Society affect change? And if so, it was a positive or negative?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. I just was talking to a friend of mine about Tucker Carlson. Tucker's in the news because he recently got fired. And, he was a guest on our podcast. And because, of such prominence, you don't want to talk to people who are on TV every day about the same thing they talk about all the time. So I'm like, what am I going to talk to him about? And I found an article he wrote in City Journal 20 years ago. And it was about successful middle-class Black communities in DC when he was there and other cities across the country, and how, Blacks were doing some well, both how the government in their effort to fix things made it worse, and how it's so unfortunate that many people don't know about it. They didn't learn from it. And so now all those communities are gone in Detroit, Bronzeville, and Chicago, all these areas. You talk about what Black communities were like. They had struggles, of course, especially if you're in areas where there was Jim Crow and segregation and things of that nature. But there were more successful Black businesses in these neighborhoods then in the 50s than there are in the 40s than they are now. So obviously we fix some things while breaking some other things, because, this thing is large, right? The problems, the country, the number of people, the different viewpoints, all that stuff. So every change you make has a drastic effect. So I do consider myself a conservative. I'm not a Republican. And I say that because conservatives tend to beat up on the Great Society. I do too sometimes. But it's not like none of the stuff was helpful or wouldn't work. I'm not saying that all of the problems today, like the left say, they can be tied back to slavery, can be tied back to the Great Society. But it wasn't really done right, and it wasn't implemented properly. But beyond that, it was done at a time, right? Well, actually, I think if they would have been more aggressive earlier, but had a sunset, we would have been better off. Like, I'm a big reparations guy. I think that was the only answer for slavery, right? Everything else, affirmative action, all that stuff. Now, granted, it's worse now because it got skewed. But had they said, we end the Civil War, we push back, we adjust some laws, get the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, we give Blacks reparations then, I think things would have been different. Didn't happen, right? They didn't do anything. Jim Crow came along, whatever. Nixon and his Philadelphia plan led to affirmative action, but it didn't sunset, right? Because we also, and actually in a weird way, the Civil Rights Act of 64 hurt the progress. I'm for it, but what it did was it codified the true equality we wanted. Good thing. But because people are flawed, it kind of shifted. So what happened was you had affirmative action set aside specifically for Blacks. Should have been stronger with reparations, took what we got. It should have sunset. It didn't. That's a problem. But on the flip side, it was a problem because after that, the 64 Civil Rights Act came and said you can't treat people different based on race, which on this face is a good thing. But that meant you couldn't write Black laws into the Constitution, right? You couldn't say Blacks get this because that would be unconstitutional. So what you look at affirmative action today, it's morphed into it helps more women, immigrants, and other people than it does Black Americans who it was intended for. So that's another problem that's not talked about much, except for in the Black community. Right. The solution is not to give people reparations now, but they are right about the fact that affirmative action was for us and now it's not. That's true. So if they had some parts of the Great Society and it ended after, let's say, 10 years, we wouldn't have been as bad off as we were.
So let me ask you a question. Let's say there's a poor Afghani immigrant who shows up on our shores and a poor Senegalese immigrant. And one is categorized as white and the other categorized as Black. Should they receive either one or both affirmative action.
No, not either one and not both. No, I don't think anybody. I think the affirmative action has lost its strength and it should just be scrapped at this point. But even when we were doing it, should they have? No, because that's not what the intention was. But the question is, legally, could you stop them? Because the law, affirmative action law, doesn't say Black Americans. So technically, they would be eligible. But should they? No. Because think about it. I'll give you another immigrant thing, right? As a Jew, I'm sure at some point, someone in your family was an immigrant, right?
Right.
We talk about immigration now, and they beat up on the right, saying you hate immigrants, and it makes me so nauseous when the left likes to bring up the poem on the Statue of Liberty. It says, "Bring us your time." They have selective memories. They don't remember Ellis Island, right? Or they remember it in this weird, whimsical way that's not true. Because the last time I checked the history books, people got checked when they got here, right? That way, last time I remember, the people on the lower decks, kind of snuck on and hoped they got over. People came in different statuses when they got off the boat. And then you were asked a series of questions like, do you have enough money and means to sustain yourself? Check for diseases, right? You had to have someone to sponsor you if you didn't have the money, or you went back. But no one remembers any of that. They just remember the poem, right? So my point was, immigrants were always, when they were allowed and when we weren't passing laws to limit them, they were able to come in under the caveat that you're going to carry your own weight. And many of them did, because of where they were coming from was worse off. We'll take that. And the other disadvantage is a lot of immigrants, though they were poor, especially Jewish, they were poor because of what happened to them, right? Not because they still had education, right? So you may be financially poor, but they didn't steal your knowledge base and what you knew how to do and your skill set, right? So you may still come with an advantage and an ability that some other people may not have.
No, you're absolutely right. It's an interesting story. We don't have time for it, but I want to bring up your book so people can buy it. But while I have you, it is an interesting point you're bringing up about Ellis Island and about the need to be sponsored and whatnot. But the Jews, in the Pale of Russia, with that, I don't know why they call it the Pale, but a section of Russia where the Jews were allowed to live, they couldn't own property, and ditto through a good part of other countries in Europe at the time. So Jews were oppressed, and they were avoided in certain professions and fields and whatnot. They couldn't be parts of the government and whatnot. So the Jewish thing was to basically build your property, because you couldn't own property, was to build your property in your mind. And so this whole thing, with the Jewish doctors, right, the Jewish dentists, and the Jewish lawyers, and the Jewish accountants, is because that was a real estate nobody could take from you. Right. And so everyone was, we're the people of the book, and you had to know how to read to go to synagogue and whatnot, and so it became this thing where you had to prep, because there's a tough world out there, and you were not favored and whatnot. And even though the Jews were white, there was no benefit to that. So it's an interesting thing. So people react differently, and even amongst the the Black community, there's different places for people are from. I think the Caribbean Blacks kind of acclimate differently from other groups, and Nigerians are doing quite well here. And I think a lot of it has to do with class and how you approach these things. But I'm going to let you have the final word. I did want to let people see your book. And so here it is.
Put it up. And tell them to buy We Want Equality too. They love it. The last word is this, that we have a cultural rot in this country, and we're not going to legislate ourselves out of it. We're not going to help Blacks by telling them reminding them of all the bad things that happened in the past and implying that it still happens. We're gonna fix it by having them focus on what they can control, because they can't really control the other things, even if they're right. So I hope that people take away, and you talk about the article in Newton specifically, that they allow people to speak and voice their concerns and learn from them instead of vilifying them, because we're all part of this country. We all have a part to play in the education of the kids, and there's more for them to learn than just drag. And I didn't write a book on Zika.
Exactly. I apologize for that. I'm about to close here. I'm going to give my last 2-second promotion. If you're on Amazon, after you buy Charles Love's book, You can buy mine. You can help support my podcast by buying Overturning Zika. That's a Brazil 2015-16 pandemic that never was, disappeared, and nobody knows why, but I do. So I'm going to call it a day. Thank you so much, Charles. We can chat, but I'm going to say goodbye to everybody else.
All right. Thank you.
Thank